Yeah, welcome everyone. Nice to have you here on our webinar. It's going to be a very interesting one. The title of the webinar is Unleashing the Data Dragon, Taming Security and Privacy Challenges in the Realm of Advanced Data Analytics and AI. And this is going to be a really interesting one. We talked to a lot of data engineers and architects out there, and they all share some similar challenges and similar kind of experiences in setting up those environments. It's not only that you need to make sure that such an environment is scalable and kind of provides the right information at the right time, but there's also other areas like compliance, security, privacy that you need to consider. Sometimes you don't get access to data because a compliance team says, we can't give you access, you can't move that data to the cloud. And on the other end, you have the challenge, you want to provide value to the business. You want to help them make the right decisions. You want to, in essence, affect the bottom line with what you do. You need to kind of defend also the investments that were made in data analytics projects. And all of that kind of is a complex environment. Today, we are touching on some of the topics, looking at some real world examples, which I'm really excited about, and maybe introduce some different concepts that could change your way of thinking. I'm really happy that Noel Yuhanna from Forrester is with me. My name is Felix Rosbach. I'm the VP of Product here at Comforte. Comforte is a company that helps other companies to protect data, preserve privacy, and also get access to data that is blocked by compliance teams, and including making sure that you can operate and run analytics on the protected data. So basically freeing up the data for use. But that's a lot about the product. That's enough about the product. Handing over to you, Noel, for a short introduction.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for having me on this webinar. Excited to talk about and share all of the discussions I'm having with customers. So my name is Noel Yuhanna, an analyst with Forrester Research. I've been with Forrester Research for almost 2 decades. And what's interesting is I get to speak to a lot of customers every day. And these are companies in all kinds of industries, and they obviously talk to me about, what are the things they're running into in terms of data challenges, data issues, whether they are doing more modern development, but they also are dealing with legacy crisis, So definitely a big challenge for them. But they also are looking at all these modern things like, okay, what about generative AI? What about cloud computing, right? What about these migration strategies? So there's a lot of things going on there, So yeah, I'm glad to be on this webinar to talk about all these things going on, So
awesome. Yeah, so let's get started with the topic. We will kind of have a little structure here. So we will start with kind of how the market evolved, look a bit about the challenges, real world examples, as I said. We'll talk a bit how you could do things differently in terms of security, compliance, privacy, data management. And then have a look into the future. So that's the plan for today's session. And let's get started with the first thing. So market evolution. And as you said, Noel, you've been looking at the market for many years, talked to many different companies and customers of Forrester. What has changed? What are the benefits of the modern architecture over what we had in the past?
Yeah, I mean, what's changed is that obviously, since the cloud has come in, right, there's a lot of movement to the cloud. I think everyone's trying to move to the cloud. And what we see mostly in the cloud is analytics running in the cloud, operational insights running in the cloud, but transactional systems still remain on premises. Transactional systems are a bit more complex, as you know, right? I mean, there's a lot of business processes tied towards complex to transactional systems. But analytical systems, tends to be like, okay, I can maybe just move data here to there into the cloud. I can run kind of my business intelligence there in the cloud, and that's like the starting point for most companies. Transactional system, obviously, as I mentioned, takes a bit more longer, and that's why transaction systems are still dominated running on the cloud, on premises versus the cloud. But I think that'll change in the next 5-10 years for sure. But certainly that's where the things are. Also, legacy systems have been difficult to manage and deliver value, right? So legacy systems can't do sometimes real-time systems and real-time platforms. They can't do actually what you call self-service, right? So they're not able to have self-service enablement. They don't really have more real-time business availability there. Performance and scale could be an issue, and that's the reason why cloud has been definitely one of the big factors for organizations to move to drive more value there as well. And I think we also see moving towards more real-time data as well, right? Real-timeness of analytics, right? We've been talking as an industry for more than a decade or two around real-time analytics. But the question is, how many people actually are really doing real-time analytics? It's not many, right? Why? Because it's so difficult to manage the data volume that has grown, but also the fact that you have to really drive some of these results quicker and faster, and our systems haven't kept up towards driving those results. Like, what do you do with that, right? How do you do that? So this is a big challenge, I think, for the industries out there. In fact, we have had also, and then security comes in the big play as well, right? Because you can't just move data around without realizing you could be moving sensitive data as well. In fact, in 2019, we had a lot of discussion going on with a lot of customers, and they mentioned that companies were like moving back from the cloud onto on-premises, and what we when we interviewed these customers, when we said like exactly what's going on, why are people moving from the cloud back to on-premises? What was the reason? And it came down to like security and governance, and the auditors came in and said, well, your security policies which you have on premises are not really close enough to the cloud as well, right? So that's one thing which we've seen companies talk about it as well. But I would say, traditionally, I think for modern environments, I would say it's all about having these faster computers, but also having a better processes systems as well. And that's what things are all about, I guess, when it comes to modern architectures, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So from your perspective, if you would summarize, what are the three most or biggest challenges for data architecture and data engineering at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest challenge is definitely, security and compliance, governance, definitely in that one single bucket comes into play, right? So that's one big area of a challenge itself. In fact, we did actually a survey. So let's look at that survey data, I guess, around the challenges you mentioned. And this is actually an interesting slide, actually, which talks about, okay, what are the biggest challenges in executing your vision for data management, data science, and analytics? And these are 3,627 people, I guess, we interviewed last year. Well, we surveyed last year. And it's interesting, the number one issue which people talk about in all these categories is security. And we're talking about maturity of technology around security. Like, well, hello, maturity. And I think, are we ever going to have mature technology around security, right? I mean, and I think this exactly is, and why is it the case? Because the data itself has been changing. The requirements have been changing, right? There's a need for real-timeness of data. There's a need for collaboration of data. There's a need for having better, shareability of data. And then I think this whole issues around that. We also have compliances, which are many different compliances, putting pressure on organization as well. So I think the solutions haven't kept up with these requirements. So there's always requirements which have been expanding, and the solutions have been a bit slower around this. And security always comes on the top of the list. It's not that surprising as much, because we have always repeatedly seen the security and governance for the last decade. It always remains because the requirements have been growing, and the solutions have been trying to catch up with those requirements. And I think this will continue in the coming years as well. But what I can say, the cloud has made it worse. Because when you go to the cloud, the data becomes more siloed, and people don't have a better control about what data is now in the cloud. You'll be surprised that a lot of people don't know what data exists in the cloud. And I think this is a conversation I was having with one of the customers, and they think that we got tens of terabytes now in the cloud, but then we don't really have a control about what data exists. And if you look at the bottom of the screen here on that second last bullet item, it says understanding the data. That's the biggest challenge. Like, well, you can't understand the data anymore. And this exactly is a big issue, because when people go to the cloud, they can't understand the data. They can't mix semantics of the data. Semantics plays a big role. And so how do you protect data if you don't understand your data? Right? Think about it, right? So this is like a big issue right there. I think this number is going to grow to become one of the top issues. So understanding data is likely to grow in the coming years, I'm sure, because people are pushing data into cloud without realizing what data exists. Now, the top second most, in fact, it ties with the security, is data management. And then we look at the data management, like maturity of technology around data management. Like, give me a break. Like, we've been doing data management for how long? Like 40 years. And we're saying maturity of technology around data management. Like, what's going on, right? And what's happened is that the requirements, again, has changed. We need data more in real time. We need data in more self-service scenarios. We need data more consistent, trusted data in these platforms. And we're not able to drive that results very quickly, right? In fact, more than 30% of data in an organization is duplicated. So when you have duplicate data, how do you lead to consistency of data, right? And that's a big challenge itself. So this is the first time ever we have seen data management coming on the top of the ranks along with security. Data management normally used to be in the middle of the pack for the last many years, but now all of a sudden has come up on the top of the list because of the cloud computing and the multi-cloud scenarios that's going into. So that's where I can say. So I would say to answer your question, obviously, security is a big challenge out there. Obviously, data management is a big challenge out there, right? Because the data itself has to be protected and governed as well. And I think also the fact that understanding data, the semantics plays a big role of challenges as well. But also doing is the notion of architectures as well, right? What kind of things are there in terms of architectures as well, right? How do you have an architecture which can deliver your performance and your scale, your value to your business as well, right? So the architectural discussion is there. Like this one customer was mentioning to me that we went to the cloud, but our platform did not get modernized, and they're right, actually, right? You can't just move to the cloud and say, hey, my system is modernized. No, there's a modernization approach as well to take, right? And modernization has to do with all of these architectures that, hey, I can actually drive more value from the platform, which is more consistent, more trusted, but also driving more self-service and driving more real time. So things are changing a lot. And I think these challenges, I think, are obviously people realize it for the first time they go to the cloud, that all these challenges are there, and then they kind of slow down. Okay, let's look at this more seriously in terms of security, governance, in terms of architectures, in terms of data management things, in terms of how this platform gets together, and go from there. So normally the first hurdle is to getting over all these issues and what have you. What do you see, Felix, around these challenges, I guess,
Yeah, absolutely. I think compliance and security are pretty obvious. I mean, we have that specifically in Europe, where you have the GDPR compliance issue, right? And you kind of necessarily are not allowed to move data to services that are hosted or managed from the US. We still have that privacy shield kind of or privacy agreement situation that is not yet settled. Schrems 2 to be named here. But of course, the data management issue comes up quite often. To be honest, it's very closely related to risk as well. So what we see more and more happening is that companies, I mean, data management, if you want to do 100%, that's not achievable. And I think either in the future you will have 100% control of all of your data, wherever it is. That's not possible because it's such a complex environment, right? You have maybe an S3 bucket nobody knows about that is not protected, and then we have a breach, right? So it happens quite often. So of course, what you can do there is you can implement solutions that help you understand the data better, have more informed decisions on what kind of regulation applies to that specific data set that you want to move to the cloud, right? On the other end, what we see is reducing the risk of the data is also becoming more and more relevant, meaning, yes, data management, I can always do everything, but I also can say I do a kind of a more phased approach or a more kind of structured approach where I say, okay, this is high risk data. I need to manage it very, very careful because that is highly regulated and very important. This is lower kind of confidentiality level. I have to do a little bit less to manage that data and use my resources there wisely. And that's also something where we kind of see more and more data protection technologies coming into play, protecting the data before it travels to the cloud. So the data management effort is reduced with the risk that is reduced that is coming from that data. So I think those two challenges, understanding the data 100%, and we see that even the largest organizations, for our audience here, don't feel bad. I just went to a conference, data analytics conference, and we had large banks saying we have no clue, we can't get access to that data, and we were surprised that we had that data in the data lake. And it is always and it will stay a challenge, right?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with that. I guess, I mean, it's a data challenges are always going to be there because data is so difficult to protect and govern, but also how do you ensure consistency of data as well, right? Because and you're right, we got new data coming in every day, and all these new different types of sources of data coming in. We got partner data, we got external data, we got also all these different types of new platform data coming in from applications building. I remember, a decade ago, people used to build one application a year, or two applications a year. Now we're building one application every week. and when you're building one application every week, like, okay, there's a timeline which has changed dramatically. But also, people aren't really putting a lot of emphasis sometimes on security and governance as much they should be doing. They are looking for solutions that can help automate those things as well, right? So automation, I think, is going to play a big role as well, right, for some of these things. But people are looking for this modern. There's a lack of modern data governance and security, protections around data, which is what's hindering some of these deployments. I know, and that's why I came back to the point that transactional systems running on premises are certainly something which we see, because those are more complex to move to the cloud. Mostly you have the lower, the easier platforms to move, like these analytical and operational systems, more so than transactional system, I guess, right? So.
Very interesting. I think that leads us to kind of one of the key things we wanted to discuss today, which is how do architectures look like, right? We hear a lot of terms about kind of hybrid clouds, especially in analytics, right? How do you handle that? Data fabric, a term that you brought up in the past, which is kind of a very, very interesting approach to that. What do you see out there in the wild in terms of architecture?
Yeah, it's a good question. Certainly, we got all these silos of data. We got silos of data on premises. We got silos now in the cloud as well, right? Because cloud obviously, and multi-cloud as well. So data is now spread across all these things. So one of the architectures is the data fabric, which is a very popular architecture now. I guess it's becoming popular. And I remember talking about this almost 16 years ago when I wrote the first paper on data fabric. That time the focus a lot was silos, but mostly on-premises silos. Today the silo discussion also goes on to the cloud, because we got a lot of cloud data as well, right? But getting consistency of data is so difficult to do, right? And that's what the fabric does, right? So fabric is basically having an architecture which presents you the semantic layer across all these data sources. So you think about it, your data sources like data warehouses, data lakes, lake houses, databases, files, and this above this layer is the fabric layer. And this fabric is not a lake. This fabric is more of a metadata and governance layer, so that when you access this data through the fabric knows exactly where data lives and can assemble it, orchestrate it, and deliver value through APIs or through JSON protocols. And what's interesting with these platforms is that it drives more real-timeness of data, because it can actually deliver access to the data itself. So a fabric is a term, is basically so the definitions we use for the fabric is basically orchestrating this disparate data sources more intelligently and securely through a self-service integrated manner for all these applications and insights, right? Now, why are people going to look at more fabric? Is basically because it's got more like a semantic modeling, right? As I mentioned, it's not a lake, it's a semantic modeling. And this is basically representation of data in more real time. If you look at traditional architectures, right? If you look at you have transactional systems, and the data moves from transactional to the operational systems, through ETL, to replication. From the operational systems, it goes to data warehouses and analytical systems through ETL, and then it comes into the dashboard. It's normally 24 hours later, right? Or sometimes even a few hours later, right? Okay. But the thing is that what most people want is to have this in seconds. And traditional architectures can't support those pipelining and all in seconds. Hence, some of the Fabric advantages is that you can access this data directly from the transactional systems and push it out on the dashboard. So that data Fabric is more real-time driven. It's more domain driven, multi-domain driven as well. It's more distributed. It's got automation built in. It's got integration with catalogs, and also can support multi-model as well, right? But I would say there's still challenges with Fabric. It's not like, okay, Fabric is like the best thing today, we got to go after it. It's also some of the issues which we think we see, well, we run into with customers is data quality. And what it means is that, you know, it's garbage in, garbage out. And then what it means is that if your data is bad, you're going to be pushing out the bad data in real time to the dashboards as well, right?
And no chance to correct on the way, right?
yeah. Data quality is so difficult to do, right? It's so difficult to do. And I'm sure you agree with that, I guess, right? In context, right? But certainly there's issues with real-time data quality, because I think the technologies haven't really arrived as much. I mean, they're getting there about how do we handle real-time data quality. There's always been a issue about governance. Like, okay, how do you govern this data in real time? Like, if you haven't done, security policies are good when you know the data. Security policies may not be good when you don't know the data. Like, okay, this data came in today morning. Have you really looked at the data? Nobody knows, right? And can this data be available to everybody? Nobody knows, right? Because the data came in the morning, unless someone looks at it. So solutions are kind of emerging around this, right? The data governance part of it and security protections. Like, okay, can the system automatically detect, hey, by the way, there's a credit card data coming in automatically?
100%. Yep. Right? This is so important. Yeah.
And this is intelligence coming into the system, right? But I mean, you know, these are some of the gaps and issues with Fabric itself. Like, I mean, Fabric, you have to understand what data is coming in and what data needs to be available, and what have you. So that's there. Sorry,
let me underline that we have a real world customer example there that is quite interesting. Kind of they're on the journey, and I think kind of when we are out there, there's companies where kind of data fabric is like a future project for them. They really like the idea, but it's not like they are on the journey. They still have a very traditional architecture. Some companies are on the move. This one particular customer is kind of having 250 different data sources.
Yeah.
And they had a very centralized kind of architecture in place. And yeah, so kind of it's a very challenging thing if you now move to more like a decentralized data fabric kind of type of architecture. What is key is you have to get your data management, data governance, your data security right before you do that step, because in essence what we see a lot of times is if you do that, you actually accelerate your challenges from those areas kind of to an extent, right? Because you basically lose more control, right? If you go decentralized, if you go kind of very quick, if you have like real-time access to the data, if you are not under control of that data, it spreads around pretty quickly, right? So kind of what is really fundamental there is setting up those environments in the right and making sure you have the right controls in place, protecting the data, for example, at an early stage, right? If you think about those architectures, you're kind of distributing data for different data products for fast access to many different kind of areas on the world, right? If you go for a multinational company, if that data is not protected, and then you have to deal on 20 different instances with data governance, you end up in a very, very, very hard to manage kind of environment, right? Rather than moving that earlier upstream, moving it to an earlier space where you have that, still have that kind of, not saying bottleneck, but where it channels through somehow, right? If you kind of extract it from a database, for example, right?
Yeah,
that's kind of a thought here, yeah. How do you? Go for it.
There's also this notion of a data mesh architecture which has been growing, and you talked about it as well. That okay, what's data mesh? And data mesh, you know, it's more decentralized, distributed architecture, and which you were trying to talk about as well. And basically, the whole idea is, I guess, to have this data across multiple domains. You know, right? Like, let's not put everything together in a single domain, one big platform, so to speak. Let's break it down and conquer, right? Break it down in smaller chunks, and the chunks are actually domains, right? And these domains are actually where people with business knowledge and awareness are the ones who are owning that data. So there could be different groups of people managing that data. So it's more divide and conquer. And I say that data could be domain driven, like customer domain, right? So a customer domain data could be a separate instance, and then you actually have product data, which may be on a separate instance altogether. Supplier data or partner data could be another domain as well. So multiple of these domains could be connected together as well, right? And that's what the mesh is all about. And basically, it's more about people, process, and culture in the mesh architectures versus technology. Like Fabric is more about technology centric, as of integration, federation. Mesh is more about the principles. It's more about people, process, culture, and that's the most important thing, because how do you actually have data across all these different domains and yet be able to access the data, right? So you obviously have to have they call it federated computing governance, right? Computational governance. So, and basically, this whole the notion of governance being more federated is the idea that, hey, we can have domains, yet it needs to have a federated governance around all these data sets as well. Now, and then there's a domain ownership, as I mentioned. Data is being owned by some people who know the data very well, and that's how it is. And it's more for building a data products as well. You're building data products so that the data products could be then shareable to other line of businesses or departments as well, right? So that's how the data mesh architecture kind of works. Now, obviously, there are challenges with data mesh, just like Fabric as well. We talked about it, right? Data mesh, obviously, like the decentralized approach with data mesh is that, well, how do you have this data ownership defined? Who owns these domains? What kind of authorization, access controls do we need to define for these domains as well? How do you deal with federated governance? Because now the fact that the data is all across in different domains, how do you federate those data sets as well? How do you build like those self-service capabilities as well, right? I mean, how do you have those capabilities to be more self-service enabled? What about performance latency as well, right? So there are some challenges which people deal with it. Normally, from what I'm talking to customers about it, data mesh takes anywhere between 6 months to a year for a starting project. 6 months to a year. Data Fabric takes normally 3 months to 5 months timeline. And data mesh and both of these architectures are a journey, which does not mean that you're done in 3 months and you're done in 6 months. No, it's a journey with few sources, as you said, right? You have 250 sources. That's a lot. You start with like 5 sources, and that's when you get started. And you start to protect those sources, and you make it available, and then you add another 5 more sources in the coming months, and that is how you build a framework, right?
Awesome. Thanks a lot. Yeah, I think that's quite interesting. Also from a kind of perspective of how those things play together, right? Because kind of, as I said, a lot of companies have that on the radar, data mesh, data fabric, but not necessarily are on the way. Where others are on the journey, and they really need to prioritize what to start with, right? What is kind of what is the most important thing to do next?
Yeah.
Rounding it up, maybe kind of from that topic here. If we look into the future, and giving you 3 concrete kind of topics. Where are we heading in terms of architecture, in terms of security and compliance? What is your thoughts there?
I mean, it's a good question. I mean, where are we heading? And I think if you look at it, we do believe, having a more automated way of dealing with security policies, governance, mandates, it will be there, right? I mean, as I mentioned, if data came in like today morning and half an hour ago, how do you protect, govern, control this data? An important point I want to mention for analytics, which I think I skipped earlier on, was that only 25% of data today by organizations are used for analytics. 75% of data is not used by organizations for analytics. So what's slowing them down with 75% not being used? It's basically governance, it's controls, it's not being able to have this modern architecture as well, right? So I would say the more data you use, the better for your company, because you can actually get better insights about your customers, about your business. So you definitely should be using more data, number one. Obviously, cloud is there to help you on the journey because of ample compute resources available. But also it comes back to you need to actually scale from your data governance and your security. You need to have solutions that can scale as well, because you can't really have a solution that may not scale, right? As I mentioned, you're getting new sources coming in. So I would say the future is all about having this more automated way of doing governance, automated way of doing security controls, having these solutions taking care of the data. As I mentioned, if the data is coming in today from these customers or partners, it should automatically know and detect, hey, there's credit card data coming in. I need to protect it, govern it automatically, right? Not like someone actually look at the screens, hey, I see some sensitive data coming in. That's so difficult to do and monitor, I guess, right, as well. So I think the autonomous way is definitely the way it's heading towards. Obviously, you need to have frameworks that can provide you better controls about these access controls and also protection of data as well, right? Definitely the automation control is going to be there. I think architecture-wise, definitely we need to have some sort of a federated architecture like the data fabrics, but also you can blend in with mesh, and you can have both of them. You can have a mesh strategy and the fabric. We've seen customers do that because you can actually have these organizations look at data which is more holistic, end-to-end. You need a fabric, and sometimes more disconnected like that, like the mesh. So both of these actually are applicable to organizations as well, right? So absolutely. And then obviously you got to look at how do you predict data into this generative AI, the discussion going on today, that, hey, how do we manage and govern this? And I think, this is a very, very important point because of the hallucinations happening with the data itself in the public domains, but also it can happen in the private domains in your organization. I know one customer was mentioning recently that they put in 1,000 databases for their LLMs on the private data sets for the private LLMs with the foundational models, and then they realized that the questions they were asking these LLMs were not really very well designed and giving us all wrong information, I guess, so it'll take us a while there, but I think security and governance plays a very big role in all these generative AI. So definitely be mindful. I think organizations who are heading towards generative AI should definitely look at solutions to automating those security governance controls. Manually, imagine trying to control 1,000 databases. It could be a nightmare. So those things as well, right? So I think the future is about a combination of the fabrics and the meshes, but also having these more automation around the security and governance frameworks. What do you see as well?
I couldn't agree more. Yeah. So having a data mesh architecture, because you need to, right? You need the speed, you need the data products to be very close to the teams, right? But then having data fabric that makes it easier for them to consume and makes it easier for you to orchestrate and make sure that there is kind of a unified approach to that. I think your LLM comment I really liked, or the AI comment, because that is very closely related to how much data do you get access to, what the quality of that data is. And if you said like 75% of the data is not accessed yet, that would increase the quality of those LLMs quite drastically. Challenge is, how can you, in a sophisticated fashion, explain to your compliance team that 75% of data that you now move to the cloud and in the LLM where you have no access control with current LLMs, at least, because you based on the queries, you get a lot of insights on things that you can't really manage, is not affected. And what we see with clients quite often is the good thing with analytics is if you overprotect a little bit. If you do that with a transactional system, you run into trouble. Why? Because if you too much protect it, you might affect the business process and things go down, right? You lose transactions or whatever. In an analytics world, having that automation, for example, we do like data discovery and classification, understanding what is happening with the data, and then having the solution configured a little bit too secure isn't too bad, because in the end, in the analytics process, you might come across, oh, I need that data in the clear, and it shouldn't be protected. No issue to kind of wind things back and deprotect and decrypt that data, but you don't do any harm. And that gives you the chance to onboard much more of that 75%, not 100% of the 75, but let's say half of it to use, which is really, really important.
No,
So
that's
that's a little comment from my end.
No, I think that's a good point. That's a great point, I guess, you bring up. But we've also seen some organizations actually leveraging LLMs with data products. And what it says that the whole domain does not need to be opened up for everybody. Let's build products which are very more contained. The data products are about metadata and data, and then basically and policies. And these products could be smaller products of the domain, and that smaller products are these products which are then opened up to LLMs, which makes it a lot simpler and to govern and control. And that's the starting point sometimes. Like, hey, let's not open the whole domain to everybody, which could be a nightmare itself. So and then prompt engineering obviously is something which is obviously coming up right now quite a lot. People have to be cautious about what they're going to be asking, and they're controlling that as well. Not everybody. I know one customer was, as I mentioned, they had 1,000 of databases connected to these LLMs, and they were asking like, what's the salary of this person X? And the salary of the person X was all wrong, right? Because it never had real data. So it thought that, hey, is this job title is this, hey, hence this salary is probably this, so those things come up. So how do you deal with those protections of data in LLMs? And I think Fabric actually presents you that contextualization of data. The context is there, which is why the people are leveraging through the Fabric or through data products. And those are starting points. Not like, okay, I want to go to and give you the ocean or the lakes to consume in LLMs, and then makes the security become a nightmare. I think we have to gradually take the steps to get to that secure model.
Yeah, awesome. So coming to the Q&A, we have a couple of questions here, and if you want to ask more questions, please feel free to add them. We have 5 minutes left to go through some of the questions. We will certainly kind of send you a written answer if you want, kind of on a specific question if you bring that up. One question that kind of was interesting for me is the question around globalization. So the core question here is, what if I have to deal with multiple regulations such as CCPA and GDPR? How do you deal with that? So Noel, what is your perspective on that?
Well, globalization, it's a good question. It's in fact a great question, because globalization, obviously for large organizations, protecting data, especially with GDPR and all, you have to nail down data, localize it, through maybe tokens, through tags. I mean, that's something which we have seen some of the large organizations do, so that the data does not leave the region itself, right? So you can tag some of the data that, hey, this customer data is going to be tagged towards this region, and then whoever is accessing the data outside may not be able to access it. So you're going to build these policies and all. I mean, I'm sure there are solutions to help you there as well, but normally manually you got to do this sometimes in terms of defining those attributes about the tagging of data towards a region. And then I think it's definitely a big challenge. If you're dealing with global analytics, which some companies do, obviously you got to scrub, de-identify the data through masking techniques, that, hey, this data needs to be aggregated. So then we don't care about customer name and addresses and telephone numbers. We just care about the transaction value and the product value and the product name as part of the aggregation cycle, which is fine. So you got to be obviously mindful about some of those things in terms of security and protection. What do you see, Felix? Yeah, what is your opinion?
Really making informed decisions, in my opinion, as you said, right? Understanding the data more and making sure you understand also what regulation applies, because in essence, from what we see, it's always a spectrum, right? You have all the data in the clear, which would be dream world for doing data analytics, because you can do everything on all the data and you would be in the nirvana, right? And then the other end is you don't have the data. Or the data is completely locked down or locked away, so you can't do anything. And the good thing is regulations put a line in the somewhere, right? It's not like they are not allowing anything, but they have some limitations.
Yeah.
The challenge is to get your analytics stack and your entire environment as close to that line as possible, so you keep as much utility and possibility to analyze it, while not putting your line kind of affected by one regulation that is more restrictive. Shouldn't mean you should do it for all of your data in the same way, right? Otherwise, you limit yourself again from doing things, right? For example, it might be that one country has a regulation that is not that restrictive, and you can do a little bit more with the data. You don't want to have that, oh, I'm going secure, I'm applying GDPR to everything and protecting everything. You need a solution that is granular enough to give you that, to get as close as possible to that legal line. So you're not doing anything bad, but you still do what you can, right? And that's the thing that we see more and more. But for that, you need to understand what data do I have, classify it, attach the right regulation to it. That's so important. Yeah.
No, I totally agree with that. I think it also depends upon what type of workload you're running. Are you running analytical workloads? Are you running transactional workloads? Are you running operational workloads? That matters as well. Sometimes the analytical workloads is more of an aggregated data, which you don't really care about for that smaller granular data. The aggregation of data doesn't require as much of details of security as much, because you can mask it and de-identify data as it goes up the chain for aggregation, I guess, right? So it depends on how granular are you looking at the controls as well. But you're right, but I think automation, as I mentioned, automation of these tools for security and governance plays a big role. And I think this is something which you can't really manually try to protect. This data went out the network. How do you protect that data? This went on that network. How do you protect the data? So someone actually has to, and that can take milliseconds. Human eye can't even detect those data movement, as you know it. And this is the biggest concern people have on the planet, as like, how do you have this automation built in? So automation will be the big thing for really scaling this up,
Absolutely, 100%. And I think those are nice closing words. We reached the end of the webinar. We had the 40 minutes. Thanks, Noel. It was awesome to have you with us. Very cool insights. I think there's a lot more to cover. Certainly we will, this won't be the last time, I guess, of us talking. Maybe we dive a little bit deeper into AI topics next time. But with that, thanks for joining also to the audience. If there are any questions, feel free to send an email, get in touch with us on LinkedIn. I think we are both quite open to answer questions there. And yeah, thanks again and see you soon. Bye-bye.